What I tend to do in the basis of this presentation is life cycle assessment. So we have collected every single thing we use in peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, and we've opened it, and we've weighed the packaging, and we've weighed the plastic, and we've looked at the transport, and then we've done a lot of hypothetical. Unfortunately, and I do get a little bit frustrated, being an academic, a lot of our stuff is hypothetical, right? We're measuring, we're modeling, we're making recommendations. But our main goal in KitNewCare is to try and, at least theoretically, reduce the footprint by 40% compared to 1990 levels, and that was sort of the main outcome of our bid. Do we change the packaging? And so the overall footprint of the packaging, this is what really surprises me, right? The packaging percentage. So we have the product percentage, the product waste, the packaging percentage, and the packaging waste. And again, because I've only got 15 seconds a slide, I have highlighted some of the fairly scary things that we found in terms of the packaging. The packaging of the adhesive tape, the dialysate bags, and some of the dressings that we use. But there's lots of things that we need to understand when we're looking at packaging, right? We can't, it's very easy as an academic sitting in our ivory tower to say, just get rid of your packaging, we don't need it. And then the nephrologist, the manufacturers will say, yeah, but then we end up with, and I asked them if they send me some broken nephrology stuff, because they said they get a lot of complaints if their packaging isn't right. But I ended up thinking broken egg will be the same thing. So we need to make sure that we balance our packaging reduction with sterility, safety, and product integrity. And it's that line between how much plastic and paper and cardboard we use to package our products to keep the products whole. But we could be doing more, I think, in hospitals in terms of measuring and weighing our packaging under a Plan Do Study Act quality improvement process. I think this is something, if there's any clinicians in the room just starting the new sustainable journey, I think this is something that you could do quite nicely, just to show, even if it's just by weight, how much of the stuff that we buy, the weight comes from the packaging, and that's how we get those really high percentages that I showed before. And then looking at engaging with manufacturers and, in a theoretical fantasy where we would just ring the manufacturers say, hey, could you cut your packaging by half? Could we do that by tomorrow? You would then, what I'm saying is just engage with manufacturers and try and push for less packaging or clever design. And what can we do to reduce over packaging? So the scary thing I think quite a good example is the large plastic lump, and this isn't the adhesive tape, because the clinical tape would look different, but just how much plastic is involved in the internal component that might not be necessary, right? You get rid of the internal component of your plastic tape, you've then reduced your packaging. So some of this stuff is really just not necessary and hasn't been given a sustainability lens. But yeah, what can we do in terms of redesigning our products to reduce that packaging? Yeah. We know about recycled cardboard, but one of the reasons our cardboard footprint is so high is that across Europe, it's just not being recycled enough. It's not being collected by manufacturers. It's not being pushed into a system. Cardboard is an amazing product to recycle, but it's getting our healthcare waste, our healthcare packaging into the recycling scheme. And other things that we could do, how many times do we buy clothes, for example, where you have this bit of cardboard attached to it? Can we look at sustainable ink to reduce that footprint? The whole circular reusable system, in hemodialysis, this was a study on peritoneal dialysis, but in hemodialysis, things that we can do to reduce our packaging and our product footprint. This kind of circular redesign, and one example is the blue drum recycling process that is happening in Australia, but not in Europe for some reason. And then the extended producer responsibility that my colleague Amelia and I were once again talking about this morning, a dental company who is delivering their products in packaging, in reusable packaging bags, and then they're collected and reused, etc. So what can we do to extend or produce a responsibility? And also trying with the EU legislation coming out here, how do we track all of this? How do we track reusable packaging to try and get it back into the system and keep it in the system? And how do we collaborate? So KitNewCare is a good example, I think, of a multidisciplinary collaboration. And And the next thing is changing the product. And so this is a different footprint. You can see the packaging now, but you can see the different footprints. This is slightly clearer, it's the same data. And this is where you can see where our footprint is made up of these different products. And by showing where the footprint is made of, if you look at how high the transportation is of the dialysate bag, right? Because it's just so heavy. And the things you can do with dialysate bag, you can simply make the dialysate in your own hospitals. So there's high transport in some areas. The waste treatment of some of these really big products is huge in terms of the carbon footprint, especially if you don't empty the liquid from the bag and it goes through the healthcare waste process, it's really high. So I think some of these figures are really quite shocking. I would have thought that the footprint would have been the left-hand column and the manufacturer, so it would have been the product and the manufacturer, but it's all this packaging, transport and waste treatment, and these are our really low-hanging fruit that we could do stuff with quite quickly. So how do we reduce our transport? We know this, right? We either make it locally or we start to use much better environmentally friendly transport systems. We look at a sustainable manufacturing. This is some rocket science, right? Because so much of our factories that are across Asia that are still using high coal-based energy. We need to move away from this to a more reusable, to more renewable energy. The type of plastic used, and this is, I'm sure, when Suri will talk more, but there are, I call them bad plastics, sorry Suri, but I call them bad plastics and not so bad plastics. I'm not looking for fossil fuel plastic goods. And how do we waste treat? And this is a paper that we are still trying to publish, and it's just one type of waste treatment, but we know that there are clever ways of recycling healthcare waste. We know that we don't need to burn it with a ridiculously high carbon footprint. And this, I showed this slide last year because it's still so important, and I'll show you why. The pyrolysis, recycling in a chemical way, the plastic really reduces your footprint. This comes off this, so the footprint is around 600 compared with 2.5. But plastic recycling and recycling in general is really complex, again, but not my area. This concerns me though, which is why I say bad plastics are not so bad. It's like how much of the plastics is getting into the water, even to the wastewater. And this is a really interesting paper that showed that the waste leaving the waste plant, the water leaving the waste plant had 13% of the plastic processed in it, which is horrific, and again, why we talk about bad plastics and not so bad plastics. But we looked at a whole lot of redesign, and you can see here, and I'm going to flick through these really quickly because I've got 2 more minutes. We looked at a theoretical redesign process. My colleague, my PhD student, he's also my colleague, James Larkin, did some redesign studies where you can see how much you can reduce by reducing the corrugated board box, going for electric transport, the healthcare waste, getting rid of the healthcare waste and using our more recycling pyrolysis process, changing the APD machine and going for renewable energy and removing some printed packaging. This is the 3-litre dialysate bag. Again, just the amount that you can reduce by changing your healthcare waste. And again, reducing your corrugated board box. I did run about 10 of these and I tried to reduce them because it does get a little bit boring. Healthcare waste, recycling the healthcare waste. Recycling the healthcare waste again. But you can see how much you can reduce the product, right? We're supposed to be reducing our footprint by 40%. These are some quite nice examples. If, again, we could ring the manufacturers and say, could you just change it by tomorrow, we could do some things quite quickly. But I'm quite optimistic when you look at these different ways of reducing our footprint. So, theoretically, in KitNewCare, we showed quite significant theoretical product redesigns of up to 86.7%, that I'll show you on cool slide here, and where we got these reductions from. So, if we talk to our manufacturers and say, can you provide us all our stuff with electric transport, that's immediately reducing the procurement footprint that we have by up to 20%, depending on how heavy the machine is. The recycled plastics, again, I think we're pretty smarter at how we recycle our plastics, but the waste treatment also huge gains.